Title for this morning, The Inner Journey. So we have the Magi. Nobody knows exactly what the Magi were. Were they magicians? Were they astrologers? These wise men, we don't know how many there were. We assume there might have been 3 because of the 3 gifts we go on to learn that they left. But they came from the east, possibly Babylon. And if you think about it, when Israel had been in exile in Babylon many years earlier, that's perhaps when they would have got to hear about the Jewish scriptures, about the promised Messiah who would be coming one day. Putting all that together and seeing God's direction in the stars, they followed the star. They stepped out in faith. They went out in the direction of Jerusalem, probably assuming that the Messiah, the King of the Jews, was going to be born in Jerusalem. Not until they got there did they know that they had to carry on in their journey. So what a great picture of faith. Before people came to know Christ, they were still walking in faith. When they arrive in Jerusalem, the city is disturbed at this mention of the birth of the King of the Jews. Herod is disturbed, and that would have been petrifying for the residents in Jerusalem because of the reputation that King Herod had. And then they're told to go find the Messiah, come and report back, and we'll see as the story unfolds what happened next. But we have this picture of people on a journey, you could say on a pilgrimage, travelling a long distance with much hardship, much uncertainty, and much danger. But they're going because of this desire to be touched, to meet, to explore, to find, to discover something of the divine. I can relate to that in many ways before I became a Christian. And one of my journeys to a physical place took place when I was 18, and I'd almost given up on there being a God. I kind of like being brought up in this Church of England primary school, kind of believed, but then more interesting things came along in my eyes, one of them being football. And having taken this year out to go and live in Israel, I thought, hey, let's give God one more chance. That was very humble of me, wasn't it? Let's give God one more chance. So from the kibbutz in Eilat in the south of Israel, on Christmas Eve, we travelled in a minibus, all the volunteers, up to Jerusalem, this wonderful place, a city that on the hill that you rise up to, and then down into Bethlehem. And I remember looking up at the night sky. No doubt my stories from childhood of the wise men following the star were in mind, because I looked up at the stars and I was very moved and very sincere. And I said to God, God, this would be a good time to show me where your son was born. I think he knew that already. But I thought this would be a good time to show me. Went into Bethlehem. We got out of the minibus and I was really disappointed. All the soldiers that were there, it was at a time in the 80s when it was quite dangerous, and the crowds and the things being sold, the souvenirs. And this wasn't any offence against American choirs, but the big American choir in the middle of the square, it wasn't what I was looking for. So I went away very disappointed. Over the years after that, I also went on physical journeys, searching. And at one time I went to Judaism. And let's go to the Wailing Wall, the remaining part of the Jewish temple that was so central to them, and see if I can meet with God there, if there is a God. And went away impressed, but disappointed. I went around the corner to the Golden Dome, the Mosque of the Golden Dome in Jerusalem, and I thought, well, maybe Islam has the answer. Didn't meet it then, but I went then to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul a number of years later with Kate, sincerely wondering, would I encounter something of the divine there? And went away disappointed. Got on back with life, and then a few years before I became a Christian, I went even further afield with Kate to Bangkok and went to the Golden Buddha at the palace there, and sincerely thought, well, maybe it's about Buddhism. Maybe I can see something of the divine here. And went away disappointed again. When my faith actually came alive, when I met with Christ on my journey, it wasn't in anywhere exotic. It was in Stenning, in my bedroom, during my lunch hour. How down to earth is that? But what I realized then, it's not about going places. It's about the inner journey. It's about the inner meeting of Christ. I do wonder what would have happened to Herod if he had met with Christ, if he had gone on this inner journey of transformation that we are all invited to go on. Herod has this really bad image. Historians are mixed with their ideas about how bad he actually was. Some people really liked Herod. He rebuilt part of the temple. He built many amazing buildings. Much of that was to do with his paranoia, though. And he was paranoid because he wasn't a proper Jew. He was an Edomite who had converted to Judaism. And he therefore was seen by some as the false king, the fake king of the Jews. That made him very vulnerable. When you go to some of his buildings, and I think of the Masada fortress in the middle of the desert, up a big mountain, heavily defended, it showed just how vulnerable and how paranoid he was. And sometimes that paranoia, his situation, got the worst of him. And he is somebody who, rather than meeting Christ and getting better and better, more Christ-like, he got worse and worse as he got older. It was said of Herod that it was better to be one of his pigs than his sons. And this was by the emperor at the time, because he was known to have killed his sons, but he looked after his pigs. He'd also killed one of his wives. When it came to planning his own funeral, this was what the man was like. He planned to have many people slaughtered after he died, knowing that people wouldn't mourn him. But when they heard of all the deaths of people they knew, then there would be tears and mourning. Quite an ugly man who experienced very dark emotions, real anger, real jealousy, real paranoia. I wonder, rather than rejecting the Christ, and this is what Matthew is setting up for us in chapter 2. He's showing us one attitude towards Christ, a closed heart, and that of the surprising, the Magi, those who weren't even Jews, but coming with open hearts, the offer that is before all of us. How do we approach the Christ? What if Herod had gone on the inner journey? It's easy to look at Herod and think, you are so bad, and I feel so good compared to you. I'm such a nice person compared to you, nasty Herod. But what did Jesus say about that? He said, rather than pointing and taking the speck out of somebody else's eye, let's take the plank, whatever is in our eye, about what we're like first, so that we can see more clearly. That's the invitation this morning, as we're invited to go on the inner journey. Herod's characteristics. The early church described many of those things as the 7 deadly sins. So a few hundred years after Christ, they were described as 7 deadly sins, things like gluttony, lust, fear, anger, envy, pride. And if you're anything like me, you've got some of that in you. You know what you like. You know what you think. You know what you do. I know what I'm like. And some of these things are so crafty, so sneaky. Think of pride. I think of myself with pride because I remember thinking a few years ago that I had become less and less wanting to impress people and just wanting to be who I am and do what I feel called to do. So I wasn't so proud. But then I started noticing pride about my not having pride. These kind of things that can be at the heart of us can be very, very sneaky. But I want to encourage you this morning. We're all in the same boat. We're all the same. But I want to encourage you. We talk about Herod being the false king of the Jews and Jesus being the true king of the Jews. I'm going to suggest to you this morning that all that stuff within you isn't what you're really like. That is what is known as the false self. That is what's known as your ego. Doing things from your early birth, from your early ages, to actually try and get security, not knowing the security that we have in God and the love that we have in God, but trying to control your own life in the circumstances you were born in and grew up in to defend yourself. You put on this false persona, this false self, but it is not your true self. I believe it is that which Christ invites us to put to death, to take off our old self. When Paul in Galatians and elsewhere talks about, it is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. The Greek word he uses is ego. And I believe he's talking about this false self that is created. Our anger, our lust. There is something better about you than your false self. One of the problems within Christianity, I think, has been the doctrine of original sin, which was developed again hundreds of years after Christ. And basically, you were born wretched. I was born wretched. And we are like this scum that Christ comes to cover up. This is how the doctrine goes, by the way, not what I'm saying. And it's almost as though God can only dare look at us because Christ covers us. Some have described it as Christ being our asbestos suit that we put on to protect us from the fiery wrath of the Father. And we deserve it because we're rubbish at heart. I don't believe in any of that at all. I believe the stuff which is ugly in us is our false self. And rather than it being about original sin, true theology is about original blessing. We look at Genesis and we see that after God has created us, created everything, God declares, Tov, 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 good. This is very good. That is your true self, my true self. And the journey, the inner journey, is to go from what you might call those vices to the virtues. God looks upon you and me and he sees your true self, that which he created, the essence of who you are, rather than this false self. You were created in God's image. For sure, the sinful stuff, the ugly stuff comes in, but that is not your true self. That is that which covers up your true self. You are a beloved child of God. He knows you to the very core and looks upon you with loving eyes. You are invited to go not on an outer journey. Sometimes that can help the inner journey when we go on pilgrimage. But you are invited this morning afresh to go on the inner journey. Many Christians, I believe, and I say this of ministers as well, it was my feedback to the principal at Spurgeon's College, aren't particularly self-aware. We can think the right things. Sometimes we can do the right things, but this inner journey of transformation, which I believe is what the heart of discipleship is, many don't go on it. And instead, I think many Christians, we are tempted to make things look good on the outside. Get the cup clean on the outside, or as Jesus might say, be more like whitewashed tombs. Dead or deadly sins on the inside, but looking good on the outside. And Christians throughout the ages have been very good about being moralistic. Don't do that, do this. Look good. rather than entering on the inner journey, the transformation, the collaboration, the working with the Christ within, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Glory, holiness, becoming more like the character of Christ. Christ-like rather than Herod-like. We need to trust God more with this journey because it's scary. That's why it's easier to stick with the outside, the religious stuff, because it feels safer. The inner journey can be painful because when you see your own ugliness, when Christ brings it into the light, when you allow Christ to bring it into the light, it can be painful, it can be scary. But the encouragement is that is not where you're at. It is working through that stuff with the help of Christ to get to the essence of who you are. Rather than angry, that serenity, that patience. Rather than greed, gluttony, that generosity. Rather than pride, that humility. Rather than fear, trusting and courageous. That is your true self. You are made in the image of God. The encouragement is to go on this inner journey, to follow the star, not out there, but the star who lives within you, Jesus Christ, that who we know from Isaiah and Numbers and Revelation is the star. Or you could say the light within that wants to purify, refine, and bring out the best in you because God loves you. But again, it's a journey, I think, that very few go on. Many are unaware of it, the journey within with the help of God. Putting the old self to death, not through religiosity, but through an openness and a trust to God. And a collaboration with the Spirit who dwells within you. Not within that physical temple I once looked at. The Spirit moved from the temple to dwell within the people. I think another reason Christians don't do it always is because of a fatalism. I am who I am, you don't change. Or if you do change, God will do it for me. That is more like the thinking of the magicians and the astrologers of old, who thought you were born this way, the stars determined everything, you had no choice. Sadly, much of Christianity falls into that trap, thinking that everything is predetermined. Whereas we have a God who wants to collaborate with us, wants us to collaborate with him, wants us to bring what we have to the table. It's much more exciting than just following the set path that God has preordained and getting on that path like robots. God is more with us, intimate, interested. So how do we do it? I think slowing down. I think many people rush through life, get through the end of life with very little self-awareness. Many Christians. This wonderful mixture of self-awareness and self-honesty, which can be painful, and Christ-awareness, just like that. So slowing down, and what a beautiful time to slow down, not just at Advent, but what a beautiful opportunity to slow down and reflect. To look for that star within the divine that dwells within. And to follow that star, Jesus Christ, the Spirit of God, deeper and deeper on the inner journey. It is about Christ working within you. And we know through Philippians that Christ will complete that work in you. But in the meantime, we are to work with Christ, not leave it all to him. To collaborate with that inner transformation into the Christ-likeness. So things like slowing down, I would encourage you to check out contemplative prayer, centering prayer, being with God. And even if we don't feel, even if we don't use words, being open to the transformation from within. I encourage you to reflectively read the Bible again with new eyes, with fresh eyes, to meditate on the Bible. I encourage you to be open when you go to your whole life group. Because of this ugliness within all of us, we put on the persona, the mask, which isn't ourselves. Our true self is underneath, but we don't want to reveal that because there's that ugliness too. But be open and trusting of God, and be open and trusting of the essence of goodness which is in all of us. And dare to grow with the help of Christ. Ultimately, I think whatever we do, it's doing that to God. I trust you. I trust your goodness. And I trust if I go on this inner journey, you're leading me to a good place.